Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, was born Princess Alice of Albany on the 25th of February 1883 at Windsor Castle in England. She was the only daughter of Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany, the youngest son of Queen Victoria, and Princess Helen of Waldeck-Pyrmont. Tragically, Alice's father Leopold died when she was just 1 year old, his life cut short by haemophilia, the blood disorder he inherited from Queen Victoria. Raised by her widowed mother, young Alice spent her childhood under the watchful eye of her royal relatives. Queen Victoria doted on this granddaughter, and Alice often visited her many relations across Europe, developing a close kinship with a sprawling royal family network. In fact, she had over 40 first cousins on her father's side alone, including Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, illustrating the extent of her royal connections across the continent. From an early age, Alice's life was steeped in the traditions and expectations of royalty during the Victorian era. She was christened in Windsor Castle's private chapel, and even Queen Victoria attended her confirmation in 1898. A memorable childhood anecdote hints at both the privilege and perils of her upbringing. At age 4, Alice was asleep in her nursery when burglars attempted to break into her family's London home, Clarence House. The intruders were thwarted by the quick alarm raised by her nanny. An incident later smoothed over when Alice's mother tried to comfort the frightened child by pretending the disturbance was caused by Father Christmas. Such stories show that even in her youth, the princess's life combined ordinary childhood fears with the extraordinary circumstances of being born into royalty. Alice was also touched by the peculiar genetic legacy of her family. Like many descendants of Queen Victoria, she was a carrier of the haemophilia gene. Though she never suffered the disease herself, this inheritance would later have tragic consequences for her own children. These early experiences, loss and love, family duty and danger, forged in Princess Alice a resilient spirit and a keen sense of duty that would characterize her long life. In her late teens, Princess Alice began to assume a more active role in royal society, and with that came the prospect of marriage. In 1903, at age 20, she became engaged to Prince Alexander of Teck, known as Alger, to friends and family. Prince Alexander was himself a member of Queen Victoria's extended family, the son of Princess Mary Adelaide, a granddaughter of King George III, and the younger brother of Princess Mary of Teck, who by then was the Princess of Wales, married to the future King George V. This match made Alice simultaneously a cousin to the British King and the sister-in-law of the British Queen. When the couple wed at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, on the 10th of February 1904, King Edward VII, Alice's paternal uncle, personally gave the bride away. The ceremony was a grand family affair, attended by a host of royal relations, including Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, who travelled to see her cousin marry. On that day, observers noted that Alice looked the picture of happiness, a radiant royal bride embarking on a new chapter. Marrying Prince Alexander bound Alice even more tightly into Europe's royal dynasties. Her new husband was the brother of Queen Mary, consort to King George V, which meant that Alice was now the sister-in-law to the Queen of England. She was also a first cousin to King George V himself. Their fathers, Prince Leopold and King Edward VII, had been brothers. This unique position, being both a blood relative of the king and an in-law to the Queen, gave Alice a singular status in the royal family. It placed her at the very nexus of the British monarchy's inner circle, a trusted connection between households and generations of European royalty. Princess Alice's family life soon grew with the birth of 3 children. Her daughter, Princess May of Teck, born 1906, and 2 sons, Prince Rupert, born 1907, and Prince Maurice, born 1910, brought joy but also heartbreak. Baby Maurice tragically died in infancy in 1910. Then, in 1928, Prince Rupert, who had inherited haemophilia from Alice, was gravely injured in a car accident in France. Due to his condition, a seemingly survivable crash led to uncontrolled bleeding. Despite days of hospital care, Rupert succumbed to hemorrhage at the age of 20. Alice and Alexander, serving abroad at the time, were unable to reach England in time for their son's funeral, which was attended by King George V and Queen Mary in their stead. These personal tragedies deeply affected Princess Alice. Friends and family noted her strength and composure through these losses, qualities likely shaped by the early loss of her father and the ethos of duty in which she was raised. Through all the joy and sorrow, Alice remained devoted to her family. Her surviving daughter, Lady May, as Princess May later became known, would carry on the family line, while Alice and Alexander provided steady support and love to their grandchildren in the years to come. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 upended the lives of many European royals, and Princess Alice's family was no exception. As Britain fought against Germany and its allies, the personal ties between royals on opposite sides of the conflict became a source of tension and controversy. Alice's own brother, Prince Charles Edward, Duke of Albany, had inherited a German ducal throne in Saxe-Coburg and Gotha as a teenager and was effectively raised in Germany. During the war, Charles Edward chose to support the German Empire, his adopted country, against Britain, his birth country. This decision was seen as a betrayal in the UK, and in 1919, the British government stripped Charles Edward of his British peerage and titles for taking up arms against his native country. The once beloved brother of Princess Alice was now viewed as an enemy of Britain. It was a painful familial rift that symbolised the larger conflict tearing Europe's royal houses apart. Alice, firmly loyal to Britain, could only watch as her brother's choices during World War I permanently altered his status and reputation. Years later, this rift would widen when Charles Edward became an enthusiastic supporter of the Nazi Party, a dark chapter that would cast a long shadow over Alice's family. For Princess Alice and her husband Alexander, World War I brought a different kind of identity crisis. Both were of German descent through their family lines, the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha for Alice and the Teck family for Alexander, and anti-German sentiment in Britain was at its peak. In 1917, Alice's cousin, King George V, took dramatic steps to solidify the British royal family's loyalty in the public eye. He issued letters patent, anglicising the family name to Windsor and relinquishing the use of all German titles and dignities for himself and his relations. Prince Alexander of Teck dutifully renounced his own German title, Prince of Teck in the Kingdom of Württemberg, along with the style of Serene Highness. For a brief time, he even went by the name Sir Alexander Cambridge, adopting his family's new surname. In recognition of Alexander's loyalty and to compensate for lost titles, King George V created him Earl of Athlone in November 1917. From that point onward, Alice's husband was known as the Earl of Athlone, and Princess Alice herself assumed the new title Countess of Athlone. Despite these changes, Alice's royal status in Britain was never in doubt. Because she was a male-line granddaughter of Queen Victoria, she retained the style of Her Royal Highness and the rank of Princess of Great Britain and Ireland in her own right. In other words, while she willingly relinquished the inherited German titles of her Coburg lineage, Princess Alice remained Princess Alice. This unique position, a British princess by birth, yet also the wife of a British nobleman, set her apart. It underscored her role as a bridge between the old-world dynastic system and the modern rebranded House of Windsor. During the war, she, like many royals, devoted herself to charitable activities on the home front. Though records of her specific wartime nursing or charity roles are sparse, Alice was active in supporting military hospitals and aid organisations, following the example of her aunts and cousins. She experienced World War I, not only as a member of Britain's royal family rallying the nation, but also as a sister of a German duke on the opposing side. An emotional conflict that gave her a profound personal perspective on the costs of war within families. By war's end, in 1918, the map of European royalty had been redrawn. Monarchies fell, cousins who had once visited in childhood were deposed or exiled, and the British royals had reinvented themselves for a new era. Princess Alice emerged from World War I with her status intact and a renewed commitment to public service, ready to carve out a meaningful role in a changing world. In the 1920s, Princess Alice's life took her far from Britain, to the southern tip of Africa. Her husband, the Earl of Athlone, Alexander, was appointed Governor-General of the Union of South Africa, a post he held from 1924 to 1931. Alice accompanied him as vicereine, essentially the Queen's representative consort, and together they embarked on what would be a formative chapter in their lives. South Africa in the 1920s was a dominion of the British Empire, marked by deep cultural and political divisions. Tensions simmered between the English-speaking South Africans who tended to support the British Crown and the Afrikaners, Boers, of Dutch descent, many of whom held Republican or nationalist sentiments. Princess Alice, with her warm personality and sense of duty, proved to be an ideal viceregal consort in this complex environment. Although Alice left formal politics to her husband, she became an indefatigable hostess and bridge builder during their South African years. She presided over Government House in Pretoria and Cape Town with grace, hosting local leaders from across the societal spectrum. Notably, she forged friendly relationships with figures on opposite ends of South Africa's political divide, including General Jan Smuts, the prominent pro-British statesman, and J.B.M. Hertzog, the Afrikaner nationalist leader and prime minister. At a time when British and Afrikaner communities were often at odds, Alice's ability to engage cordially with both sides was a quiet but significant form of diplomacy. Beyond the formal dinners and receptions, the down-to-earth princess rolled up her sleeves and involved herself in community causes. She visited Girl Guide troops, sponsored local charitable events, and served as patron or fundraiser for organisations such as the King Edward VII Nursing Association in Johannesburg. South Africans grew accustomed to the sight of Princess Alice cheerfully opening fetes, attending hospital functions, or handing out awards to Boy Scouts and Girl Guides. Her genuine interest in people from all walks of life earned her affection and respect. The Athlones also left a tangible legacy in South Africa. They built a seaside retreat at Muizenberg, near Cape Town, a cottage by the ocean where they could escape the formalities of Government House. That home, known simply as the Athlone House, still stands today and has been declared a national monument. In Cape Town, a new suburb was even named Athlone in honour of the Governor-General's residence there. These are lasting reminders of the high regard in which the viceregal couple was held. When the Earl's term ended in 1931, Princess Alice left South Africa, having enriched the role of vicereine with her kindness and enthusiasm. She had navigated the challenges of a far-flung dominion with tact and dedication, experience that would prove invaluable in her next great adventure on another continent. In 1940, as the clouds of World War II spread across the globe, Princess Alice once again answered the call of duty, this time in Canada. The sudden death of Lord Tweedsmuir, then Governor-General of Canada, left that critical post vacant in the early, uncertain days of the war. Despite growing sentiment in Canada for appointing a local citizen as Governor-General, the Canadian Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, believed continuity and royal representation were vital in wartime. King George VI, Alice's first cousin once removed, and also her nephew by marriage, turned to a trusted family member. He asked the Earl of Athlone, by now in his mid-60s, to serve as Canada's Governor-General, with Princess Alice by his side. The appointment was announced in 1940, and though unexpected, Alice embraced this new responsibility with vigour. At age 57, she packed up her household and embarked on a hazardous transatlantic journey in the middle of a war. Crossing the Atlantic in June 1940 was not a simple voyage. U-boats prowled the seas. To evade the danger, Princess Alice and her husband zigzagged across the ocean aboard their ship, arriving safely in Halifax after a tense journey. From there, they travelled to Ottawa, the Canadian capital, where Alexander was sworn in as Governor-General on June 21, 1940. As the new Vice-Reine of Canada, Princess Alice moved into Rideau Hall, a rather rambling 175-room historic residence that she lost no time in organising and making into a comfortable 175-room historic residence that she lost no time in organising and making into a comfortable wartime home. Ever the efficient household manager, she reportedly familiarised herself with every detail of the establishment, down to the number of dustcloths in the maid's cupboard, some joked. But domestic order was just the beginning of her contributions. Canada was now her domain to serve, and World War II would be the defining backdrop of her time there. Princess Alice threw herself into war work and public service in Canada with characteristic energy. She was appointed Honorary Commandant of the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, Honorary Air Commandant of the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division, and President of the Nursing Division of the St. John Ambulance Brigade. In these roles, she became a visible advocate for Canadian women's contributions to the war effort, inspecting training schools, visiting units, and boosting morale. While the Earl of Athlone toured military bases, munitions factories, and hospitals across the vast country, acting as a living link between Canadians and the King in London, Alice focused on supporting those on the home front as well as the troops. She made frequent visits to wounded soldiers and nurses, lent her name and effort to wartime charities, and spoke encouragingly to volunteer groups. In 1941, the vice-regal couple undertook extensive cross-country tours, crisscrossing Canada by train to visit small towns and big cities, rallying support for the war cause. Alice's warmth and approachable manner endeared her to Canadians in those anxious times. Wartime also brought an influx of European exiles to Canada, and Rideau Hall became an unlikely sanctuary for displaced royals. Princess Alice's royal relatives from various occupied countries sought refuge on Canadian soil, and she welcomed them with open arms. At different points, the stately halls of her Ottawa residence sheltered Crown Prince Olav and Princess Martha of Norway, Grand Duchess Charlotte of Luxembourg, King Peter of Yugoslavia, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, and her daughter, Princess Juliana, among others. In one famous case, Princess Juliana of the Netherlands gave birth to her daughter Margaret in an Ottawa hospital during the war, a delivery made possible by Canadian hospitality and even a temporary declaration of the maternity ward as Dutch territory. Princess Alice was at the centre of this extraordinary cosmopolitan household, deftly balancing privacy and hospitality. She even had her own family join the enclave. Her daughter Lady May Abel Smith and May's young children, Alice's grandchildren, came to live at Rideau Hall for the duration of the war. Surrounded by children's laughter and the comings and goings of exiled heads of state, Princess Alice created an atmosphere of warmth and normalcy amid wartime upheaval. One of the highlights of Alice's Canadian years was her role in hosting the great Allied leaders during the pivotal Quebec conferences. In August 1943 and again in September 1944, Quebec City was the site of top-secret meetings between British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Canada's Mackenzie King, meetings that would shape the strategy for victory over Nazi Germany and Japan. As the King's representative, the Earl of Athlone officially presided, but Princess Alice was an important presence. At the Citadel, the historic fortress residence in Quebec, and later at the Chateau Frontenac Hotel, she mingled easily with the likes of Churchill and Roosevelt, providing a gracious royal touch to these momentous gatherings. Photographs of the time show Alice beside Eleanor Roosevelt and Clementine Churchill, the wives of the leaders during the conference, underscoring her role as a steady figure in the background of high politics. Observers noted how the Countess of Athlone's poise and charm helped ease social interactions at these intense wartime councils. Not every moment in Canada was filled with high diplomacy. Princess Alice also believed in uplifting spirits through simple pleasures. She and Alexander hosted tobogganing parties and ice skating sessions on the grounds of Rideau Hall during the long winters. The vice-regal couple, well into middle age, could be seen bundled up and laughing alongside young officers and local children as they slid down snowy hills. Such scenes endeared them even more to the Canadian public. By the time the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Earl of Athlone led Canada's VE Day celebrations in Ottawa, and Princess Alice stood proudly with him as the Union Jack was raised in victory. In speeches, Lord Athlone spoke of a future marked by reconstruction and reconciliation, and those ideals resonated with Alice as well. The Athlones had served Canada with distinction in a time of crisis, strengthening the bond between Canada and the Crown. When their tenure ended in 1946, Princess Alice departed Canada with genuine regret and deep affection for the country. Before leaving, her husband established a scholarship, the Athlone Fellowship, as a parting gift to Canada's future engineers. As they sailed home to Britain, Alice carried with her the memories of a remarkable chapter. She had been at the heart of the Allied war effort from the New World, proving that even far from London, a British princess could have a profound impact. Her years in Canada further cemented her reputation as a hard-working, empathetic and unifying figure, truly a princess who had lived up to her royal duty on a global stage. After World War II, Princess Alice returned to a much-changed Europe. In 1946, she faced a personal ordeal that brought the war's aftermath painfully close. Her brother Charles Edward, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, was arrested by American occupation authorities in Germany for his enthusiastic collaboration with the Nazi regime. Once a royal prince of Britain, Charles Edward had become a disgraced figure. Upon learning of his imprisonment, Princess Alice, ever loyal to family, travelled with her husband to Germany to plead for her brother's release. She met with General George S. Patton's officers, appealing for mercy on Charles Edward's behalf. Despite her efforts, the American authorities and subsequent German denazification court did not yield to her pleas. In 1946, Charles Edward was judged a Nazi supporter, heavily fined, and virtually bankrupted for his actions. This episode was a sobering reminder of how far the world, and her own brother, had changed since the genteel days of their youth. It was a controversy that haunted her family, yet Princess Alice handled it with a balanced grace, acknowledging the justice of the punishment while privately mourning the brother she had once adored. Those who knew her say she never spoke ill of Charles Edward in public. Instead, she carried on supporting post-war charitable causes, focusing on healing and the future. In the post-war decades, Princess Alice gradually transitioned into the role of a royal elder stateswoman. Widowed in 1957 when the Earl of Athlone died at Kensington Palace at age 82, Alice continued to live in a grace and favour apartment at Kensington Palace for the rest of her days. Despite her advancing age, she remained remarkably active in public life. She attended every major royal event and milestone, often as a living link to the past. In fact, Princess Alice witnessed the reigns of 6 British monarchs in her lifetime, from her grandmother Queen Victoria, through Edward VII, George V, the brief reign of Edward VIII, George VI, who was also her nephew by marriage, and finally the long reign of her grandniece, Queen Elizabeth II. Few in history could claim such a span of direct experience with the crown. She was present at the coronations of 4 of those monarchs, from Edward VII in 1902 as a teenager, to Elizabeth II in 1953, when Alice was a regal 70-year-old. Foreign royals, too, counted on her attendance at their ceremonies. Notably, she travelled to the Netherlands in 1948 to witness the investiture of her goddaughter and cousin, Queen Juliana. In 1950, demonstrating her commitment to education and the Commonwealth, Princess Alice became the first Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, a role she took on with enthusiasm. Well into her 70s, she flew to Jamaica and other islands annually, presiding over graduations and encouraging young scholars, a testament to her forward-looking mindset and stamina. Her travels also continued. Having been one of the most well-travelled royals of her era, she visited Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas on goodwill tours and personal trips well into her later years. The sheer breadth of places she had seen was extraordinary, from Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and Malaya, to Saudi Arabia and Egypt, to Canada and the United States. Princess Alice truly lived up to the nickname, the Globe-Trotting Princess. Throughout her long life, Alice garnered a reputation for kindness, wit, and resilience. Those who met her often remarked on her frank and candid charm. She had a warm laugh and a practical, no-nonsense manner that put people at ease. A contemporary described her as kind, candid, enthusiastic, and fun, and praised her impeccable old-fashioned elegance. She never sought the spotlight or courted scandal. Instead, she exemplified the Victorian ideals of service and propriety, tempered with a genuine humanity. If there were debates or criticisms surrounding her, they were mild. Perhaps some in the press once saw her as a remnant of a bygone age, or noted that she could be forthright to a fault. Yet the consensus in historical hindsight is that Princess Alice used her unique position wisely and generously. She had been born into a world of emperors and queens, and by the end of her life most of those thrones had fallen. Still, she adapted and found new ways to contribute, whether by championing nursing, higher education, or simply by being a living archive of royal memory who could advise and guide the newer generations of the royal family. Princess Alice chronicled many of her experiences in a memoir, fittingly titled For My Grandchildren, published in 1966. In it, she recounted the sweeping changes she had witnessed and the personal anecdotes that made up her remarkable journey. When she celebrated her 90th birthday in 1973, there was an outpouring of tributes from around the world. The young Princess Elizabeth, who had once curtsied to Aunt Alice, was now Queen, and she led the well-wishes for the family matriarch. Alice continued to appear at events, often photographed engaging warmly with everyone from heads of state to palace footmen. With her ever-present pearls and feathered hats, she embodied a certain graciousness that seemed to be fading from modern royal life. On the 3rd of January 1981, Princess Alice died peacefully in her sleep at Kensington Palace, at the age of 97. With her passing, an era truly ended. She was the last surviving grandchild of Queen Victoria, a distinction that newspapers around the world noted with reverence. Queen Victoria's last grandchild dies, aged 97, read the headlines. It was as if a living bridge to the Victorian age had been gently folded away. At her funeral in St. George's Chapel, Windsor, the royal family gathered in force to pay respects. She was laid to rest at the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore, near her husband and 2 sons, and fittingly close to the mausoleum of her beloved grandparents, Victoria and Albert. Princess Alice's legacy is one of quiet, yet profound service. In her nearly century-long life, she witnessed world-changing events and took part in many of them in her own dignified way. She was the longest-living British princess of royal blood in history, a record that still stands today, symbolising her exceptional longevity. More importantly, she was a woman who moved with the times, from the horse and carriage days of her grandmother Victoria to the jet age of her grandniece Elizabeth II. Alice carried forward the lessons of duty, compassion, and adaptability. She remains a somewhat unsung figure in popular history, not as famous as some of her royal cousins. But to historians, her story is invaluable for the insight it provides. Princess Alice was a royal link between centuries, a witness to the fall of old Europe and the rise of the Commonwealth, a participant in both world wars, and a patron of causes from medical care to education. Her life reminds us that beyond the more dramatic or notorious figures of royalty, there are those like Alice who quietly sustain the monarchy's presence through steadfast work and personal grace. In the grand tapestry of the 20th century history, Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, holds a unique and honoured place, the last Victorian princess who steadfastly served the crown and her community into the modern age.